Hello. In this technical assistance recording, we'll be reviewing some of the general guidelines for the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority's Notices of Funding Opportunity. Let's start first with the definition of an implementing agency versus a program agency. The implementing agency is the legal entity that receives grant funds, such as a town or a city or county. A program agency is an entity that is a subdivision of the implementing agency, and it's the program agency that carries out the program operations and is responsible for data and fiscal reporting. Good examples of program agencies are a police department or a sheriff's department. They are subdivisions of the larger agency, their implementing agency. These definitions are important as we look at the Uniform Application for State Grant Assistant template. If you've applied for state assistance through other state agencies, you'll notice that this form looks slightly different. That's because the authority has been given permission from the GATA office to slightly modify this form so that we can meet not only the GATA requirements but some requirements for our different federal funds as well. You'll find when you bring up the template for this NOFO that this first page has been completed for you. You'll need to complete pages 2, 3, and 4. You'll notice that this information is seeking information on the implementing agency. So that will be your city or your county. The employer ID number, DUNS number, SAM's expiration date, SAM cage code, and business address must match what the implementing agency has inputted in the GATA portal. Below that, we're seeking information on who should be contacted regarding programmatic matters or fiscal matters. This isn't necessarily the executive or the chief financial officer, but it might be. But these are the people who we would need to contact if we have any questions about any of your application materials. The next box is information on the program agency. So that would be your state's attorney's office or your police department, your sheriff's office. That's the information that we're seeking here. In these boxes, we're looking for the areas that are affected by the program and the congressional, state senate, and state representative districts for the implementing agency. And it should be based on the 9-digit zip code that the implementing agency used when it registered in the SAM.gov system. The primary area of performance might be the same as in box 55, the areas affected. And then we'll be asking for the congressional district, state senate district, state representative district of that area of performance. So the areas affected might be the entire county. There might be a primary area of performance that is a discrete location. The title of the applicant project, you can get that from the NOFO. The proposed project term, the start date and end date, again, will be listed in the NOFO. This table is where you're going to list the estimated budget. So this would be the designated awarded amount would be the amount that you're seeking from the federal fund. The budgeted amount is the total budget. This would be any match or overmatch. And if there is any program income, it would be listed here. And so that total amount should match that budgeted amount. And you can indicate here if you will be charging any indirect costs to the agreement. Next come the signatures. And before that, here's the applicant certification block. A lot of people miss checking the I agree box, but that's important. And now we need the information on the executive for the implementing agency, the financial officer for the implementing agency, and the authorized official for the program agency. And that's the uniform application. There are two levels of eligibility for the NOFO. First is the NOFO-specific eligibility requirements and restrictions. This information is available in the NOFO document itself and in the programmatic technical assistance recording, also available for this NOFO. Secondly is compliance with the Illinois Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, or GATA. It is the implementing agency, not the program agency, that must register in the GATA portal. They must complete their pre-qualification, and that includes verification of both their Dun & Bradstreet registration and their state debarred and suspended status. And finally, the implementing agency must complete the internal control questionnaire on the GATA portal, and their state cognizant agency must approve that ICQ. Now, sometimes a state cognizant agency might have some questions on some of the responses on the ICQ, so I would encourage you, if you haven't yet done so, to have your implementing agency be sure that they are registered, pre-qualified, and they've completed their ICQ, because there sometimes can be some time lag going back and forth for any clarification before your agency receives that ICQ approval. And that's really important because the authority will only review grant applications from agencies which have registered with GATA and have received their approved SFY18 GATA ICQ. Now, if you registered and had an ICQ approved for state fiscal year 17, you must re-register, you must complete a new ICQ, because ICQ approvals are only valid for 1 year. This is the address where you can complete your GATA registration, pre-qualification, and ICQ submission. Now, one of the ideas behind GATA is that it identifies fiscal and administrative risk on behalf of that implementing agency, and it automatically generates some specific conditions based on those risk factors that must be included in the grant agreement and in the notice of state award. If you are selected for grant funding, when the negotiation of your agreement begins, your grant monitor will send you the programmatic risk assessment scoring tool. That's an Excel file, which is really simple to complete, but it measures risk at the program level, not the implementing agency level. And that scoring tool will, again, determine additional specific conditions that will be incorporated into the NOSA and into your grant agreement. Don't look for that programmatic risk on the NOFO website right now, because that will only be sent to agencies which have been selected for grant funding. Now, one of the most critical rules in grant funding is supplanting. And supplanting is the deliberate reduction of state or local funds due to the existence of grant funds. Because grant funds must increase or supplement the funding available for program activity. It must expand those resources. So grantees must maintain a level of state or local financial support for program activity that is equal to or greater than the level prior to receiving the grant funds. Now, recently the rule was changed for VOCA grantees that are nonprofit agencies. Those agencies, nonprofit agencies receiving VOCA funds, are not subject to the supplanting rule. However, law enforcement agencies, other government agencies are subject to the supplanting rule. Now, if you are selected for a grant agreement under this NOFO, you will be obliged to submit quarterly financial reports and timekeeping certifications, as well as quarterly progress reports, which are based on the goals, objectives, and performance measures table in your grant agreement, as well as, if you're subject to a federal award, then there will also be additional Department of Justice performance metrics that will be incorporated into the quarterly progress reports. All grants are subject to closeout reporting, which include a final financial report as well as a final progress report. If applicable, grantees will submit an annual audit report in accordance with CFR Part 200 uniform requirements. Your grant monitor will discuss that with you if you do receive an award. But be mindful that future awards and fund drawdowns may be withheld if any of these reports are delinquent. If you do receive a grant through this NOFO, we want to review some of the procurement requirements. The basic rule is that all procurements must be competitive. Minimum requirements mean that you must publicly post all employment opportunities. You must obtain at least 3 quotes from vendors for any purchases or subcontracts under $100,000. And for any subcontract or procurement over $100,000, you must go through a formal bid process, either through an invitation for bid, an IFB, or a request for proposal, an RFP. And those are both subject to authority approval. For all procurements, records must be maintained detailing the procurement. If your grant agency has, if your agency has internal requirements that are more stringent or more competitive than the authorities, it is the more stringent rule that must be followed. Again, if you do receive a grant award through this NOFO and you will be doing a procurement that is a sole source, additional justification will be required. And a sole source is when there's only one vendor from which the grantee can procure the necessary goods or services. It's also a sole source if you do a formal process, if you do an RFP or an IFB and you only receive one bid, you'll still need to submit sole source documents. But if you do have to do a sole source justification, remember that document doesn't say that the vendor is the best choice. A sole source certification is saying that the vendor is the only choice. As I said, the general rule to remember for all procurements is that the transaction must be conducted by the grantee in a manner to provide, to the maximum extent practical, open and free competition. Always remember that you should not incur any costs before you receive a copy of a fully executed grant agreement. And finally, neither the State of Illinois nor the authority are obligated to make any state award as a result of this notice of funding opportunity. The authority executive director has sole authority to bind the state government to the expenditure of funds through the execution of interagency grant agreements. Thanks for joining us.